Good morning. Today we have um,
Dave Sharpe.
Dave Sharpe. I just quick lost him.
I do it all the time, Betty.
And we're going to discuss what's happening in the legislature in this last week,
Yes.
or what accumulated and ended up in the last week.
Yes. So I'm proud of the work we did in the legislature this year. One of the things that really stands out to me is how bipartisan and inclusive we are in our committee work. And the bills that we put out of our education committee and tax committee represented work across the aisle with Republicans. It represented work in terms of trying to do the best things we could for Vermonters. And I'm quite...
And working with the governor?
Well, yeah, that's an unfortunate thing. We have not, we meaning the legislature, has not figured out how to deal with this governor. I've been in the legislature for two previous governors, one Republican, Governor Douglas, and one Democrat, Governor Shumlin. And the way that it worked with those two governors is that there was a negotiating process during the legislative session, so that when we reached a conclusion, for the most part, we could, shake hands and go home. This governor doesn't appear to want to negotiate until after we're done, and he might put ideas on the table, which he did. He might put markers or goals on the table, which he did. But then, in terms of getting from where we were to those goals, or considering his proposals that he put on the table, there's no, or little or no, interaction with the governor's office moving forward until the very last few days of the session, when it becomes too late to actually give serious consideration to the details of his proposals. So I expect, like last year when he vetoed the budget and the tax bill, I expect the same thing to happen this year. If he does that, he will have vetoed as many budgets as all the governors in the history of Vermont put together have vetoed.
Oh, wow.
It's really quite remarkable.
Yeah.
And then after these vetoes, then he wants to engage in a negotiating process. So that's what I expect this year. It may not come to pass. He may see the wisdom of what we did in the legislature and agree with the budget and the tax bill that we wrote and worked very hard to produce. But I don't expect that at this point.
Well, that's kind of hard. I mean, usually, I remember we worked together all year long, and the past bills all year long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that doesn't happen with this governor.
Uh-huh. Well, that's a shame. Well, let's talk about some of the issues you are passing, taxes and...
So yeah, let's start with taxes, because that's likely to be vetoed. And I'd like to talk about moving goalposts. Now, you probably didn't expect a sports comparison here as a part of this conversation.
Yeah.
But he started the year saying what he absolutely didn't want to see was increases in tax rates.
Mm-hmm.
So we worked hard to keep tax rates at or close to what they were the previous year. Then he added to that a while later that we had to use $58 million worth of one-time money to keep the tax rates the same, which is there are a variety of ways of keeping the tax rates the same. He was insisting on this particular way to keep the tax rates the same. Then, after we chewed on that for a while, he came forward and saying, keeping the tax rates the same and using one-time money is not enough. There has to be a way to save $300 million in public education spending. And then just the day before we were concluding our business in the legislature, that number went to $400 million. So I refer to this as moving the goalposts. What he said in his first initial proposal was a single piece to keep tax rates the same. By the time we ended up, it was keeping tax rates the same, using $58 million worth of one-time money in order to keep them the same, and to carve out of public education $400 million worth of spending on our children. I think that's unconscionable. I think it's an effort to kill public education in favor of private education and vouchers, because one of his proposals was to go to a fixed $17,000 per pupil. And in his proposals for saving money, that was not going to come out of private schools, that was going to all come out of public schools.
Oh, wow. So that...
To me, it's quite striking.
Yeah.
And very concerning.
And when you don't give enough time for discussion of that purpose, of that problem, and how to work it out,
that makes it even worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
We did do some really remarkable good things that I think the governor will agree to. We completely revamped how we do special education in Vermont. What we did when we did Act 46, which has been very good for students across the state in reducing administrative conflicts in authority and spending. Part of what we did then, we hear this mantra often from a sort of a small group of Vermonters that say, we spend too much in education, we spend too much in education, we spend too much in education. So we listened to that, and we commissioned, as a part of Act 46, a study to look at how much we spend in education, and is it enough, is it too much, or is it just right? And what they came back and said was, we spend about the right amount in K through 12 education. I want to reinforce that. We spend about the right amount in K through 12 education.
And that amount is?
That amount is roughly $18,000 to $20,000 per pupil, all in, when you count all the expenses.
Mm-hmm.
They said we spend $30 million too much in administrative costs. And we believe that we've already seen administrative costs. We know that we've already seen administrative costs shrink as a part of Act 46 and bringing administration, consolidating more administration around our schools. And the other thing they said was we spend about $140 million too much in special education. So that was a red flag. We took that very seriously. And what we did was we commissioned 2 additional pieces. One was a study that UVM won the contract for to look at how we fund special education. And what they said was that the reimbursement model we currently use is forcing higher spending. And if we change to a census model of funding special education and increase the flexibility of schools in their methods of delivering special education, that we could deliver better special education to our students, and we could save between $70 and $80 million doing it. So that's pretty significant.
So change to the censor middle.
Yeah, which is to say, we spend roughly $2,000 per pupil. If you add up all the pupils and you divide that into the $300 million we spend on special education, we spend about $2,000 per pupil on education. So if we give that $2,000 per pupil to 2 school districts. So if you have 1,000 students in your school district, you get $2,000 per pupil. I think that's $2 million, or I think that's $2 million that you can spend on special education, and we will relax a lot of the rules. let me go back to
Oh,
let me go
so-
back to
uh-huh.
how we do special education right now. We
Right.
do a reimbursement model. And what I often do in a room full of people, as I said, I say, if I sent all of you out to purchase groceries and I agreed to pay 60% of what you spent on groceries, might your spending be different? Might you buy the steaks instead of the hamburger, for example? And when we put this reimbursement model in place, we were so concerned that school districts would go out and spend excessive amount of money just because they knew they were getting reimbursed for that money. So we put some very strict rules. Time studies, special educators have to report every 15 minutes of their involvement with a special ed student. We have rules about if you're going to try to get reimbursement for a special educator, 51% of the students that are in the room at the time have to be special ed students, and other types of rules and audits and reporting that we require of schools in order to get their reimbursement.
Mm-hmm.
And the irony of the whole thing, that in the world of unintended consequences, what we actually did was we actually forced higher spending. An example of that is
well.
that if I'm going to be a special ed instructor for Jane or Sam, it's easier to assign me full time to that individual student. Then I follow all the rules we put in place. It's easy to audit my time because I'm spending it strictly with one student. It's easy for me to document my time every 15 minutes because I'm always with that one student. But that's not good practice. That doesn't, in fact, in many ways, that gets in the way of the student actually growing and getting good education. So we changed that rule so that, and the census model allows much more flexibility in how we deliver special education services. Special educators are excited about it, superintendents, school boards association, regulators. They all think that this was a very good move. So I'm looking forward to delivering better services to our children.
And what are those better services?
Well, I'll give you an example. So in a class, let's say we have a math class, and we have 20 students in that math class, and 3 of them are special ed students. So the teacher goes up to the board, gives an assignment on how to do quadratic equations, and sets the students to work on examples and practice to figure out how to do quadratic equations. Do the odd numbered problems on page 35 or something like that. And then the teacher works with the students to help them get over their problems, maybe on an individual basis. And the special educator in the room works with the 3 students. Now the best practice would be to have the math expert, that math teacher, work with the 3 special ed students and reinforce and help them understand how to do math, while the aide in the room works with the other 17 students in completing their problems. That can't be reimbursed because the math teacher's not a special educator and the special educator's not working with special ed students. So even though that's better practice, it's not reimbursable under a reimbursement system. If we go to a census model, it's perfectly okay. The kids get better service because they get better education because they're dealing with a math specialist in overcoming their handicap around math, and the 17 other students are getting the kind of support they need and that an aide can provide in a classroom in terms of practicing their quadratic equations.
And the special ed teacher gets paid extra?
How people get paid is up to the local school board.
Oh.
But they can, what I'm saying is that methodology would be permitted under a census model where it's not permitted under a reimbursement model.
And is that in effect now, or?
No, it will be July 1st.
So July 1st. Most bills go out.
Yeah, provided the governor doesn't veto it. And this particular piece the governor agrees with because it saves money, and so I expect that he'll sign this bill.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so did you want to speak about anything else on special ed?
Sure. One of the things that we hope happens with this is that we know that a lot of our students entering public education, kindergarten, first grade, are in need of extra support. They're deficit in math or reading, not enough to get an IEP to become labeled as a special ed student, but enough so that if we expect them to succeed, we know that if they aren't on the same level as their classmates by grade 3, they're unlikely to be successful by grade 12. So even before students get a label, an IEP special ed label, we can get them additional support under the census model. Under the current model, to get extra support to those students, we have to wait until they get a special ed classification.
Uh-huh.
That delays getting special ed support or extra support to those students,
Mm-hmm.
but more importantly, then labels them with what becomes a stigma by the time they get to 10th and 11th and 12th grade. They're labeled as a special ed student, and that actually further hurts their ability to be successful. So we can actually help students be more successful by delivering student supports early, kindergarten, first grade, without a label on these students, so that they're successful even through 12th grade without needing to get a special ed label.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Who?
The question is, why didn't we do this, 10 years ago or
Yeah.
something? Yeah. Well, I served with a remarkable committee. We had
You were on the education
I
committee.
was the chair of the education
Chair.
committee, and we had Republicans and Democrats. We voted this bill out unanimously. We worked very hard to understand what the problems were, what the potential solutions were, and how we might develop a bill that addresses those problems in a way that we have better outcomes for our students.
Now, you must have asked teachers of special ed students or teachers of the whole group to your meetings.
Yes, we did. We had testimony from teachers, from the Special Ed Teachers Association, from school board members, from the State School Board Association, from superintendents directly who are helping deliver these services, and from special ed coordinators in the supervisory unions, and from the Superintendents Association, from the union that represents teachers who are in the classroom. All of these entities thought that we were on the right path and we were doing good things for students.
The union must have been a big help. I mean, to get the idea over to you.
Yeah, well, let's face it, it's the quality of the teachers that we have in our schools that make all the difference for our students. Most everybody can remember that special teacher that helped them be successful, that made their school experience a positive experience, and that made them embrace education. The union recognizes those teachers and supports those teachers, and we know that the quality of teachers in our school make all the difference in terms of the outcomes of our students.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm proud of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we all ought to be proud of our education in Vermont.
We know we do a good job with public education in Vermont. We fall short in two areas that we need to address still, and that is educating students from low-income families. And we believe our special ed bill will help in that regard, because there's fairly close correlation between low income and special ed needs. So we think that we've taken a step in the right direction in helping low-income students, but we still need to work hard at providing successful pathways for students from homes that are have low incomes. The other place we fall short is inspiring our students to move on to some form of education beyond high school, whether it's a trade certificate in welding or auto mechanics, my field, or whether that's a degree, associate's degree, or a four-year degree diploma at a college. We know that almost 70% of the jobs available in the next decade are going to require some sort of education beyond high school. So we need to find ways to encourage more students to seek some form of education beyond high school.
Well, that's very important.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just wondering, with your low income, you haven't been able to teach your children certain things? Why?
So I think a lot of it is, and we did some work, we have in our, unfortunately we were not able to get it to the finish line, but we hope to do more work next year on after school activities and especially summer activities. So we know that students from families of means, they have books in the house, they go to computer camp or some other educational situation in the summertime. This keeps them up to date, if you will, or keeps them along the learning process in evenings and the summertime. Low-income children, on the other hand, often don't have access to these after-school and summer activities, and it's commonly referred to as the summer slide, where students will leave school, in June, and then come back in September or late August and have actually lost some of the learning that they did in the previous year. So if we can address these things with summer activities, that's a wonderful thing.
Oh, I never realized summer activities were so important. Now I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they do, my wife takes our grandchildren to Echo or to the Montshire Museum or reads books to the children. And she'll do that all summer long. There are lots of children that don't have those opportunities. And we also know after school, the time that kids are likely to get into trouble is like 3 to 6 p.m. or 3 to 7 p.m. After school is over and before mom and dad get home from work, and kids are on the loose, that's when they can get into more trouble than they bargained for. And so after school activities are critically important for all our children, but particularly our low-income children.
Well, that's good to know. Did you want to talk about pre-K? Say something about?
Yeah, we failed to make progress in pre-K. There is a great deal of tension going on between the two agencies that oversee early education. That's the Child Development Division of the Agency of Human Services on the one hand, and the Agency of Education on the other hand. Some of that is the silos that we put people in the state. Some of that is because federal regulations for child care, which is under AHS, are different than federal regulations for education, which is what we do under AOE. So part of it is a federal problem, part of it is a state problem. We also know that there's conflict between public and private pre-K centers. And I would say, in general, there's a huge conflict in this state and in the nation regarding whether public or private education is the best way to deliver education to our children. There's this whole notion that choice is good. And I have to admit, when I go to the grocery store, I love to have a choice among the different cheeses I can buy, or the different beers I can buy, or the different types of milk I can buy. So choice is a good thing. What's being played out in our education system, however, is that choice is really only available to families that have the money to pay for choice. And choice is not available to low-income students in particular. And so I'll use my granddaughter who lives in Denver as an example. The neighborhood school that she might attend, if she attended the neighborhood school, is 95% free and reduced price lunch, almost entirely black students, and the school is struggling in terms of delivering quality education to the students. It's underfunded and overtaxed. My son has a pretty good job, and CEO of his solar electric company, and we're very proud of him. Because of that, my daughter-in-law doesn't have to, she runs her own business, so she has flexible hours, and she can take the 40 minutes in the morning and another 40 minutes in the afternoon to drive our granddaughter to a charter school that's a gorgeous school, that has a mixed population, that has all the advantages. And then she can make that trip, that 40-minute trip again at the end of the school day to pick up our granddaughter and bring her home. So my granddaughter is going to do fine because our family has the means to help her do fine. But there are thousands of kids across the country, in their neighborhood and across the country, that are not able to access quality education because the choice of people with means is to remove kids from public education, and public education suffers from a restriction on the number of dollars. And we see this in the governor's proposal. He wants to take $400 out of public education. And
400,000.
$400 million
Million.
out of public education across the state of Vermont. And what that's going to incentivize is more people to say, you know what, I can afford to take my child out of public school and put them in a private school. And I want the public dollars to help pay for that child to go to private school. And we'll see, if we go down this path, we'll see a bifurcation of our public school system. Those with don't have means will live in a public, underfunded public system. Those that do have means will supplement the public funding with some parent tuition dollars in order to put their children into a higher quality school. I do not want to see that for our state.
No, I've been against that for a long time.
I know. Your politics are wonderful, Betty. And we miss you at the State House, let me assure you.
Oh, thank you. We have a few minutes left, so is there anything else you would like to?
Well, just most everybody knows that I'm not running for re-election this fall. Fortunately we have 3 quality people running for the in the Democratic Party, in the Democratic primary, to fill my seat, which is great. And there's wonderful energy in the electorate that's been generated by this president and his behavior. And I think that could bode very well for our country over the next few years as our electorate has become very well energized.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for coming and explaining all what you're doing at school.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for having me. It's delightful.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.